February 29, 2024. I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. How are you? I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. Hope you're having a great day. And we got lots of news to get through. Consider subscribing, liking, sharing, blah, 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 blah. We got tons of stuff to get after. We got a poll tonight about Klaus Schwab, which is the World Economic Forum. And we have the World Government Summit taking place recently. We're going to touch up on that quite a bit, actually, because it's quite important to this equation of nuclear. Is the World Economic Forum Klaus Schwab a Nazi, like Hitler, but instead of who, I should have put but hates humans and all Earth's species? And if you know anything about Klaus Schwab, then you know that's actually true. He used to be a professor, which makes a lot of sense when you look at the history of these people. Stuck a little Hitler mustache on him. So we also got the tanks to cover. We got the Noto earthquake. We got quite a bit of that we're going to cover pretty quick. And some updates, because we've been covering a bunch of other stories recently. We've gone through the archives to March 2011. The A-10 Warthog is just one of the many weapons that shoot depleted uranium munitions, but it's a very prolific one. It only shoots dirty bombs, what's known as DOLRAM. And an interesting story from 2019 was the Americans, there's many countries using this genocide type weapons, studied the question of disposal of 35.7 million ammunitions with depleted uranium rounds. So 35.7 million rounds you want to dispose of because you got even worse dirty bombs to use. It's so hard, I think, for the average person to wrap their mind around it. So, like you've heard over your life, terrorists are going to get a dirty bomb and contaminate your community, right, with a conventional explosive. But these are conventional explosives, each munition. This is just a fraction of them. The A-10 Warthog is just one of the many. The Abrams tank shoots the 155 millimeter DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material, but it's already gone through a chain reaction. And so there's Britain's doing it. And of course, Britain and the United States have sent their surplus of dirty bombs, aka depleted uranium munitions, to Ukraine. It's unbelievable that they're using this against, like when they used it against Iraq and Afghanistan, because these munitions apparently were supposed to be used for armor piercing, right? They used it on schools, they used it on hospitals, they used it on churches, they used it on marketplaces, they used it on neighborhoods, and everything gets contaminated because pyrophoric, it catches fire as it's going through the air. McAllister, Oklahoma, they only make dirty bombs. There's around 1,800 people in the community, and they basically all work at McAllister's munition plant, and all they make is dirty bombs. So your weapons producer, who are your biggest nightmare, your biggest enemy on this planet, and people like Klaus Schwab, Last night's video was a short video on purpose. And it was 1 hour, 21 minutes, 44 seconds. And 12 hours later, it got an extra 7 seconds. Did I get that right? 44, yeah. 6 and 1 is 7. Typically, my videos get about 6 or 7 seconds longer 12 hours later. I had a meager, according to YouTube, 89 people on my show. 45 people at the peak. I had 31 likes up, but only 11 views. And so they're robbing me of all kinds of different ways, because one of the few people that talk about the so-called taboo subjects, and they don't really got anybody else to pick on. They have complete control over YouTube, for instance. Now, my other site had 25,000 subscribers. And so typically I have 300 or 400 thumbs up when the video was over. But when I was out looking for spiders on research expeditions the year before I had heart attacks, 2 years ago, I was out deep into the woods. I was 400 or 500 miles away from home, out in the woods, looking for spiders and other species. And they took down my YouTube channel. No strikes. No strikes on my account. No emails, no messages from YouTube. They just took my account down. And so this new site I got, I basically get a subscriber every 3 or 4 or 5 days. So the site doesn't really grow, right? And my views are censored, as I just showed you. And so the idea is to demoralize me and you who are watching this stuff, right? And because they're ashamed, the people that are doing it are ashamed of what they do. And they got no one to pick on, and they can only pick on me. So they got me tortured. They're like children in many ways, and I'm like a fly to them. And they just pick the wings off me and discard me. But I'm fighting for them. I'm fighting for everybody. I'm fighting for the species. I'm fighting for the scumbags and their loved ones. And I'm fighting for the future of humanity. And if you're alongside me, then you are too. We're going to cover the Noto quake. We believe the Sheikh nuclear power plant melted down the fuel pool at reactor 1. So this was January the 1st when they had the earthquake. And this story is by no means over. Noto quake cold deaths spark a hypothermia public awareness drive. This is an interesting story, and they show you a picture. We got very few pictures from the Ishikawa prefecture, Noto prefecture, which had a significant earthquake from a 3,000 to 4,000 year old fault line that ruptured on January the 1st. So it's the first time it's had activity, significant activity in 3,000 years. And we'll get into it now. These are pictures we haven't seen before. And apparently this picture is from February the 1st. As you can see, the debris wasn't cleaned up. We'll come back to that picture. Exposure to extreme cold temperatures caught many elderly people unaware. And it didn't catch them unaware. They were abandoned by the government. The government didn't let China or the Americans or India, which volunteered to send in specially trained search and rescue teams like they've always have, and Japan wouldn't let them go up there. They wouldn't even let the self-defense force of Japan go in. And the first 72 hours is the critical time to send people into rescue. And so many countries reached out to the Japanese, and we're going to send special trained dogs, special trained teams at their expenses to go in and rescue people in their crucial 72-hour, 3-day window. Japan refused to let anybody go in and rescue them. Many elderly people. The numbers increased sharply in the country since the 1990s, but exceeded 1,000 a year of hypothermia deaths since 2010. which is an interesting thing because 2011 was the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. Suzu, the city of Suzu, which is the top of the Noto Peninsula, the mayor on January 1st, 2nd, and the 3rd was heavily quoted as saying in 95% of all the homes, not counting the business, just the homes, which was around 5,000 homes there, so 4,500 homes have collapsed, completely demolished. But we've never got any footage out of there, only the little section where the tsunami came ashore, which was devastating. But when you got 4,500 homes destroyed, you would expect the locals to publish pictures and videos too, right? That never happened. You would expect journalists to publish pictures and videos. That didn't happen. And there was heavy focus from the media. We've covered it actually for the first 30 days of this year, 2024. Exceeded 1,000 deaths each year since Fukushima, basically. They didn't want to put 2011 there, but that's what they meant. Because people's immune systems are compromised from so much radiation, and as the crow flies, the Noto Peninsula is not very far away from Fukushima. So currently there's 11,000 people still in this predicament, abandoned by the government. We've done polls on it. Should they rescue the tens of thousands of people that were abandoned? And the people, they had no water. They were living on a cup of water, not a glass, but a cup, like a small paper cup, but half the height of a normal glass. And a slice of bread, not bread and butter, not bread and jam, or bread and honey, or bread and peanut, or anything like that, but a slice of bread. And that was for the first 19, 20 days. We know for fact they were surviving on that. Now, the government has helicopters that could have brought in supplies and just dropped it anywhere in the community. The helicopter wouldn't have needed to land. They could have brought in generators. There was no reason for these people to die of hypothermia because they could have brought in all the necessities and the expertise to avoid that, and they didn't. There was 1,400 landslides, and they didn't remove them. Even in the communities, they didn't remove the land debris that was blocking off the transportation and the routes. So these are really peculiar stuff that we've never seen before. And the Sheikh community itself, where the nuclear power plant is too, the community was the biggest earthquake that Japan can have, which the Japanese Shindu scale goes to 7, unlike the international scale, which goes to 10, the Richter scale. The Japanese scale is of 7, so you have to multiply each digit by 1.428, 1.43 to get the animosity equivalent of the Shindu scale. So it's a very deceptive and deceitful and dishonest thing to do. So even though this is the case, it hasn't really gained a lot of attention. No, this is the first time I've heard that 1,000 people a year die of hypothermia. A former specially appointed professor of climatology, which solution to everything is nuclear, of course, at the Tokyo Metropolitan University. And unfortunately, because we deal with a lot of professors, we, by proxy, label them scumbags and degenerates and monsters, because that's what we see. 99 out of 100 of them are degenerate monsters and scumbags. Useless scum is the better way to... So this was in Ishikawa Prefecture, January 31st, 2024, this year. And these people were abandoned. They had no water, no food for the first 19 or 20 days. And then they still don't have any heat in the majority of these places. I can't comprehend it. The seabed was raised by the Noto quake, surveyed for port reconstruction. So we stepped back in the time machine. And we know now that the fault line is between two big power plants, the Shika and the Niigata. And there's not a big distance there. There's 70, 80 kilometers for each place. And that fault line, you see it as a checkered line over there, the Eurasian plate and North American plate. has ruptured. Now, in 2019, the average pre-2019 was around 20 small earthquakes a year. But in 2020, 2021, 22, and 2023, they were averaging 8,000 earthquakes a year. It's basically 1 an hour all day long, every day. So theoretically, they should have moved out of that environment. So step back again. Noto Peninsula earthquake exposes 600 feet of new coastline. It was actually 820 feet for 85 kilometers. Spanning about 85 kilometers through Suzu, Wajima, the Shika, which is where the nuclear power plant is, Ishikawa Prefecture. The coastline lifted up around 13 feet, and it was about 800 feet of the coastline, but it also extended inland, lifted up too. And the footage of the destruction of the roads and the communities quantify those assertions. So back to the story. Seabed raised by the Noto quake surveyed for port reconstruction. Where a powerful earthquake on New Year's Day lifted the seabed, but it wasn't just the seabed. It cut right across the Noto Peninsula. Fishing boats have been unable to go into or out of some ports. There were 6 ports were completely changed where the boats could no longer come in the harbor, and there was 56 ports that were severely damaged by the upheaval of the 3,000-year-old fault line that finally ruptured. So what they're going to do is they're going to, in the port of Suzu City, which we still haven't got the documentation from, we still haven't got the pictures, we still haven't got the videos, and everything we get for the last 60 days, basically, is regurgitated pictures of the same scenery over and over and over. And it's like Groundhog's Day in many ways. And we don't understand that. That's not normal. And so what they're going to do is they're going to start dredging out some of these places. The readings show the water near the quay, which used to be 4.5 meters deep, is 1.5 meters shallower in that particular spot. And some locations in the breakwater were found to be too shallow even for small boats. And it used to be a safe haven for adverse conditions for 500-ton class fishing vessels and was designated a harbor of refuge in case of rough seas. So this is the kind of boats we're talking about, 500-ton class fishing vessels. These are big ships, right? They can no longer go into that safe refuge, which is... So the official story now is 75,000 homes are severely damaged or completely destroyed, and 11,000+ people are still in evacuation shelters, which are unbearable after 10 days, according to the experts. And so a lot of these ports now are dried up, and you can see this is the damage of the earthquake for land lifting up. And you got to realize Niigata also had 6,900 homes were severely destroyed through liquefaction. And then the earthquake reached all the way down to here, where it done severe damage too. But obviously the Noto Peninsula itself took the brunt. And Shika nuclear power plant, they say in the basement, was an upper 5 on Japan's seismic intensity scale of 7, which basically is an 8 out of a 10 on the Richter scale, in the basement of a nuclear power plant that was shut down in 2011, but also had fuel pools that were exactly similar to the Fukushima, where they had all the fuel pools were at the top of the buildings, and that's where they kept the fuel. And because when you claim that you had a massive earthquake in the basement of reactor 1 but not reactor 2 building, you're basically trying to tell something to people in the know, right? So we're assuming the fuel pool had a significant meltdown. We don't know how significant. They wouldn't let anybody go in for the first 20 odd days. There was no search and rescue from independent countries were allowed to go in. They abandoned the community. There was 30,000 people living on a cup of water and a slice of bread. That was it. Not 2 slices, but a slice of bread a day. So, and it was recognized that the government had failed them, but there was no investigative journalism uncovering what actually, why, and how. So they were using a drone that it was able to, they were able to count how long it took the reflection to come back, and then they could tell how deep the harbor is by this technique that doesn't matter for the story we're particularly telling. Outside of the point of the damage quantifies, or the fact that the coastline for 85 kilometers rose up 13 feet quantifies the concern of the nuclear power plant, which happens to be in that particular zone and had those particular attributes, and that the community itself was a 7 out of a 7, which is the biggest earthquake you can have in Japan. It was in the Sheikh community. We still have no footage of that community. We know other communities were cut off even 4 weeks in that nobody had managed to reach. And we still have no documentation on that stuff. Charity performs an art show held in northeast Japan to support the quake-hit Noto region. And then, in one sense, when I look at this, it's very beautiful costumes. But their costumes are based, as far as I can tell, on fantasies. And this is a tradition. But what kind of tradition is a fantasy, right? Because this is, in one sense, they call it folklore. But again, now I shouldn't say anything because I'm not from that culture. But you're not really passing anything on, only costumes, to the current generations. You're going to pass that on. It's very beautiful decorations that you wear. I find it very aesthetic. But again, these dragons, which is typical of China, the Asian communities, not just Japan, right? So they were doing these performances to bring some kind of comfort to the victims that have been abandoned by the governments now for almost 2 straight months. Reality remains tough as ever, says Japan Prime Minister. Now they pledged an extra $660 million US, which I believe is now $1.7 billion. But why did they wait so long? And why would you want to rebuild in a place where a 3,000-year fault line has ruptured? And because we've covered this extensively, the rupture was considered very fractional, and they expect a major, even bigger rupture to take place. Now that the earthquake is triggered, and again, these pictures of Fukushima, we've seen these pictures for 60 days. But the rest of Fukushima had significant damage. Again, there's 75,000 homes significantly damaged or completely destroyed, but we haven't seen that evidence. We've maybe seen evidence of 200. So why are they hiding all of that? I've never seen nothing like that before. So the total amount is in the United States dollars is $1.7 billion for relief. But how much of that is getting stolen by the government's infractions? The new financial aid was announced by the Prime Minister, and he visited the quake-hit area. The last time he allegedly visited the quake-hit area, we have absolutely no evidence that he'd done it. And at that time, 30,000 people were living on a cup of water and a slice of bread a day, and they could have easily brought in the self-defense forces with helicopters, and the Americans, who were good to go. I could have brought in supplies of towels and beddings and you name it. It's very dubious, the whole story. The living conditions at the temporary shelters are improving. But you could have improved it on day 3 because you have helicopters. You could have brought in generators, and you didn't. It defies any logic I know, any rationale that I know. You could have brought in endless pallets of water with hovercrafts, and their military has those particular pieces of equipment. That there was nothing there they couldn't access. So why did they abandon that whole peninsula where the nuclear power plant was to, say that the earthquake was an upper 5 on their scale of 7 underneath, or in the basement at one point, the Japanese Times reported, of the Shika nuclear power plant itself, and that the community right alongside of it was an upper 7, was a 7 out of a 7, the biggest earthquake you can have. Yet we have no evidence, no footage of the community whatsoever. The inspection renewed the government's determination to work towards providing more support, toppling buildings, ripping up roads, sparking a major fire. And more than 10,000 people are taking refuge at shelters and hotels, and water is still cut off in many parts of Ishikawa Prefecture. It's actually over 11,000 people. Area of severe shaking, that whole peninsula was completely... Now Shika, you can see, is in the crazy zone. The epicenter is right by Suzu, where the mayor was quoted for the first 3 days widely as 95% of the homes were destroyed, which is 4,500 homes. The latest funds are designed in part to finance a subsidy system that seeks to help the young and child-rearing families rebuild their destroyed homes. But why would you rebuild a home where you have 8,000 earthquakes a year for the last 3 years, and you had a 3,000 to 4,000 year fault line rupture? Why would you rebuild in that spot? Would anybody in their right mind rebuild in that spot? Damage from the quake in Ishikawa to neighboring regions, and Fukai and Niigata, is likely to cost between $7.4 billion and $17.6 billion US dollars. And this, well, like we talked about this when the earthquake first happened. Like I said, it'll be many weeks before we know the actual story, because the Japanese are very dishonest people. They're very deceitful people. The nuclear industry involved in it means you're not getting anything. And you have to build a story piece by piece. And we've done that for the first 4 weeks. According to a government estimate as of last month, so the estimate was from last month, not February. So I'm pretty sure the numbers are much more extensive. Blue impulse teams soar above the Noto Peninsula. These things burn about $30,000 an hour. If you took that money and spent it on helicopters, you can bring in all kinds of generators and blankets and comforts and entertainment for the victims that have been abandoned. They're blowing all kinds of money on all kinds of things except for the victims. It's a big party, and the victims are the only ones who are not invited. Earthquake research traces the pace of an approaching seismic Dragon King. Again, they invoke the dragon. So they have 8,000 earthquakes a year there, each year for the last 3 years, when normally it's 20 small ones, right? Now it's 8,000 small ones. And now you have a fault line that's ruptured, that's 3,000 to 4,000 years old, which caused significant damage. And so this is still ongoing. The first couple of weeks they had around 1,400 aftershocks. In fact, the first week they were having an average of an aftershock every 7 minutes. So why would you rebuild there? What's the point? Why go back until it's stable, right? Why would you do that? Why would you, oh yeah, go ahead and build your house here. The 3,000-year fault line won't rupture again for another 3,000 years. Story doesn't work, see? So why would you rebuild it there? It's a complete disconnect from reality, isn't it? Dragon King events deviate from the power law distribution as a statistical outlier noticeably have periodically, predictably, on January 1st, 2024, a significant moment magnitude, which was the 3,000-year-old fault line beneath Japan's peninsula, which is a 150-kilometer fault line, ran right underneath the peninsula. And so the damage to the roads, the landslides and everything from it are just, it's incredible. Maybe I'll bring up some of those pictures, actually, to help articulate how incredible this really was. Just bear with me for a minute. I'll find that for you. Because that's worth looking at, the pictures. Because I can tell you everything you want, but I can't. If I don't show you the pictures, it doesn't make any sense if you're not. And even if you're around all the time, it's easy to forget, right? And then we had all the... There we go. I think I found it. There we are. Here we go. Let's look at these pictures. I'm not sure how many, but 30 pictures I gathered up. It was so difficult to get anything when it should be the complete opposite. So look at the roads. There's significant damage to the roads and parking lots. You can see where the earth is rose up. So it's not just a coastline. You can see landslides. You can see how the roads are just completely disconnected. And this is Fukushima, and this has been regurgitated to the point of you become desensitized. It's been showed so much. This is Suzu. This is one of the rare pictures of Suzu where the tsunami came ashore. But they don't show you the other 4,500 homes that are destroyed. They just show you this over and over and over. And the same thing with the Fukushima right here, over and over and over. But when you look at the damage across the peninsula, the Noto Peninsula, you can see unbelievable damage, right? And so the tsunami came ashore in a number of small ports, but because the coastline rose up 13 feet or so, and that was a huge, like 1,000 plus feet where it rose up, including the coastlines, that saved them from the worst of the tsunami, apparently. But obviously the tsunami done incredible damage. And I do believe it's several hundred ships were destroyed from the tsunami. The earthquake, the shaking was so intense, it was dropping buildings, around 7,000 or 75,000 buildings have been severely damaged or completely destroyed. And we believe the number of completely destroyed to be above 40,000. So the majority of the buildings affected were completely destroyed. So the communities that were affected had significant percentages of it damaged. These pictures were regurgitated so much, it was unbelievable. Like this is Fukushima again. So they fed you Fukushima an awful lot. This was a landslide where people were traversing out of the communities. This is Fukushima again. This is Fukushima. Fukushima. I do believe that's Fukushima too, but a different section. And so this was actually an earthquake-proof building. The building, and what they do is they put a big anchors down into the earth, and then the buildings are built, parts of the building are built around it, so you would have to literally jump over the basically they build a big pipe down into the earth full of cement, and then the buildings are attached to that. So literally it jumped over it. So the shaking was significant for that to happen, right? And the landslides was around 1,400 originally. And what was interesting was a lot of places were just bamboos. They could have cleaned it up. And including the communities could have been cleaned up, but they didn't clean up the communities. You know what I mean? Like make it. Now this was obviously from the tsunami. We do have some pictures of the landslides. This picture was perpetually shown by medias for weeks and weeks. This is where the tsunami came ashore. And I believe this one was Jima or Suzu. I can't really remember. But what was interesting was a lot of the communities, and the people were talking about it, that were stuck in the communities where there was around 30,000 people in shelters, were confused of why they didn't clean up the streets in the communities. And then when you look at all the pictures, you didn't see excavators, you didn't see bulldozers, you didn't see backhoes, you didn't see tractors, you didn't see fire trucks. It was very rare. It is out there, but it was very rare. And when I say rare, I actually mean very rare. This is probably the only picture we have of Shika, where they said it was a 7 out of a 7, which is the biggest earthquake you can get. Taken on January 2nd, 2024, shows a road damaged by the earthquake. And this is uplifting, right? This was another popular where you see all the telephone poles. This was caused by liquefaction. There was also a lot of the manholes had risen right out of the ground into the middle of the roads, and this was caused by liquefaction. This was the tsunami and what you're looking at in the picture. And again, look at the lifting of the road and the tsunami damage itself. Incredible, right? But that's only because we covered it relentlessly for several weeks straight. And so there wasn't much evidence. And this is what we gathered. We gathered up basically everything. But what was really interesting was that the people that were in the shelters, there was at this time was around 30,000+, were confused because they were living on a single cup of water, plastic cup or paper cup, and a slice of bread a day. But the roads weren't cleared so supplies can come in and out, right? And it didn't make any sense to them. Because a lot of it, you can take 10 or 20 volunteers and they could have just hand moved the debris out of the road and made it safe for traffic to pass through. But they didn't do it. And so you can see the new coastline right here versus the old coastline. And this is, all brand new permanent coastline where it rose right out of the ocean. 2024 Japan earthquake. I've never seen that picture before. 2 reactors at the Shika nuclear power plant on the Noto Peninsula survived, but experienced temporary power outages due to damage. First off, the reactors were shut down since 2011. So they didn't survive. They were fine. There was nothing in the reactors. They've been empty since 2012, I would imagine. And the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. Now, in the bottom of that, reactor 1 in particular, not reactor 2, but reactor 1, they said the earthquake was an upper 5 on Japan's scale of 7, which is basically an 8.2 on the Richter scale. Again, we see the pictures of Wajima, and that's today's pictures. And so why are they recycling these pictures? Because Wajima had thousands of houses destroyed, but we don't see any evidence of it. We see the same stuff over and over and over. It's very confusing when there's so much damage. This is BBC, and my opinion of BBC is not very high. And so this was one of the polls we had back in January. Should Japan rescue the tens of thousands of quake victims abandoned with no food, water, or heat that was the first 8 days? And they were abandoned. It was unbelievable, and now we still see that they're still abandoned. Why do Japan's nuclear plant need electricity to operate? Shaken from the January 1st Noto earthquake, measured upper 5 on Japan's 7-level seismic intensity Shindu scale, destroyed 2 power transformers used to keep electricity flowing into the facility, but the whole coast, the whole peninsula lost electricity. And 2 of the 5 power lines were down, with repairs reportedly expected to take at least 6 months. And so there was 150,000 people within 30 kilometers of the nuclear power plant, and there was no way for them to evacuate if there was a meltdown. Not that they would tell you if there was a meltdown. Like at Fukushima, they didn't tell you. I should have had that brought up for you already. My apologies. There you go. I'll bring this over for you. So they, like, to think that they wouldn't fake Sheikh is pretty naive when you consider these are journalists pretending they're in the fuel pool at reactor 4 in Fukushima. So if you don't think they do it again, you're very wrong, unfortunately. More Japanese want nuclear plants to reopen ahead of 2011 Fukushima disaster anniversary. So the Fukushima disaster anniversary is 11 days away. Tomorrow's the 1st of March, right? This is the last day of February. One reason for the shift is more Japanese are swayed by the argument that nuclear energy is the answer to global warming. But that's simply not true. More people are not swayed by that argument. There is no argument. Why wouldn't you use geothermal? Why would you even consider nuclear when you have geothermal? Every community could have its own geothermal plant. It's simple, it's stupid, it's easy, it's quick, it's cheap, and you can have it that year, not next year, the year after, or 10 or 15 years, but that year. And everybody can tap into it. The February survey, in contrast, indicated just 35% of the public still want reactors to remain shut down. Of course, this is simply not true. They're just posturing. There's zero possibility that that is true. There are a number of reasons why opposition is falling, but the major factor is the multi-billion international campaign by the global nuclear industry. That's the correct word, too, global nuclear energy industry. It's a global industry, and they all scratch each other's back. And they don't got any real opposition, do they? Greenpeace is controlled opposition. Beyond Nuclear is 100% controlled, like Greenpeace, controlled opposition. So they got a multi-billion-dollar international campaign to promote nuclear. Multi-billion dollars. And, you know, they don't care about me for the most part, but because there's 1,000 public relation firms out there that don't have anybody else to pick on, I'm taking quite the beating over the years, right? The industry has been very successful in manipulating ordinary people that nuclear energy is needed, while the opponents have not been able to get the other side of the argument out. Well, they're completely ostracized. The media will have nothing to do with them, and the media's entire legacy is promoting nuclear. There is no resistance in the media. And I also think these poll figures may be more positive because the operator of the Sheikh nuclear power plant reported no problems. Again, they had a upper 5 and a 7 scale in the basement of the number 1 reactor. Not the number 2, but the number 1. You can't just have a large earthquake in the basement of a reactor building. You simply can't do it when the other building is just 100 feet away. It's just, the industry doesn't care. It just lies, whatever. It says whatever it feels like it. So allegedly this is the Noto earthquake, the Sheikh nuclear power plant, rather. All the reactors at the plant owned and operated are boiling water reactors, which means the fuel pools are at the top of all the buildings. Nuclear emergency guidelines we review after the Noto quake. And this was January the 4th, they say this picture was. Of course, if this was true, we would have seen this picture in the first 4 weeks, because we covered it every day, but we didn't. The devastated Noto Peninsula heavily damaged roads around the Sheikh plant that would be used by local residents during evacuation. Big question is, Sheikh was a 7 out of a 7. In other words, it's a 10 on the Richter scale. So how come we got no pictures? How come the locals didn't upload any pictures, any videos? Because I can assure you, if it happened in Canada, the locals would all upload endless pictures, right? The media would scoop them or go get their own pictures. And every other earthquake in Japan, the major media in Japan flew immediately over the area, extensive areas, and documented it, and that was up online on the TV screens within a few hours. The Noto Peninsula was abandoned and still is. The 7.6 magnitude quake also damaged many buildings, leaving some areas inaccessible, not for more than a week, but for over a month. And some areas are still inaccessible, apparently. Japan quake death toll rises. And we'll go back to that story. That's an older story. It registered the highest level of 7 on Japan's seismic intensity scale in the town of Shika, which is where the nuclear power plant is alongside of that town, right? So the town was a 7 out of a 7, so how come we don't have any footage? How is that even possible not to have any footage? Japan's Nuclear Regulatory Agency ordered a probe on the quake damage. This was the Japan Times. So the Japan Times says that the quake measured the earthquake, and I hate it when they call it a quake. The earthquake measured an upper 5 on Japan's seismic intensity scale in the basement of the #1 reactor building of a Shika nuclear power plant. So reactor 2 is literally joined at the hip. You can see up there the 2 buildings and the 2 stacks. That's the 2 reactors. They're literally joined together. So how can you have an upper 5, and I'll do the math for you. I'll bring up the math. Because it really is an important story. So an upper 5, in Japan scale works 1, on the Shindu scale works 1 to 7, but it's in increments of halves. So 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 6. So an upper 5 is a 6. So in order to do the scale, you would take 10, which is the Richter scale, divide Japan's scale as 7, which gives you 1.428, and then multiply that by the upper. So let's go upper as a 5, but is 0.7. Even though it doesn't do that, we'll go 5.7, which is typically how the Richter scale works. The Japanese scale only does it in increments of halves, which is over an 8 on the Richter scale, in the basement of the #1 reactor. So in the basement of the #1 reactor building, which is measured an upper 5 in Japan's scale, which is a 7, the Shindu scale, was an 8. It was actually an 8.4 on the Richter scale. In the basement, but not in reactor 2, but just reactor 1. It doesn't make any sense. See? What does make sense is they didn't let Americans, they didn't let India, they didn't let China and other countries go in with the search and rescue teams. They didn't let the self-defense force go in with all the helicopters and drop supplies off. They didn't let the international community, like the Red Cross and the United Nations, go in. They abandoned these people for almost a month straight. And even then, it was only token stuff that they brought into the survivors that are still abandoned. Maybe it will be abandoned if something happens to the local standard evacuation center. In the Fukushima Port District in Shika, well, they were abandoned, weren't they? We covered it. You can go back to my videos and go through underneath the videos and put the headlines of all the stories. You can look them up yourself, or you can watch the videos. The shelter is about 1 kilometer to the north of the nuclear power plant. Again, but no pictures. How come we never get no pictures of Shizu? No pictures of Shika, for instance. Even that, but they admit today and that 75,000 homes were significantly destroyed or damaged or completely destroyed. And we assume the numbers around 45,000 were completely destroyed from the documentation. But because they're so deceitful and so dishonest and so deceptive, it's very difficult to get a good read on it. But notice he did not receive any information about the situation at the nuclear facility in the aftermath of the quake. And according to the non-regulatory agencies, the nuclear, aka Nuclear Regulatory Agency, stipulated residents should be evacuated when a serious accidents occurred, and people within 5 kilometers would be given priority. But those within 5 to 30 would be initially be instructed to stay indoors, get irradiated, and eventually get sick and be abandoned. A comprehensive nuclear safety review needed after central Japan. Every part of this story, the Noto Peninsula caused damage to the Shika nuclear power station, where the intensity of the quake reached a full 7 on Japan's scale of 7. Lodging base is set up in the Noto Quake volunteers. The story gets stranger and stranger because you're 2 months down the road. And why don't you send in the military? Why are you waiting 2 months for a small group of volunteers that can only work part-time? Why not send in the military? Just try to do, because they would have Geiger counters, I guess. It's heartbreaking to see all these people abandoned by what's considered the 3rd most developed nation in the world. This is Canada's story. Burying nuclear waste, the best of a bad bunch of options. First off, let's say they do decide they're going to bury something. You have 5.5 million fuel assemblies. And the assemblies got many, many rods in it. They estimate it'll take 100 years. It'll take them 15 or 20 years just to build it. And then it'll take 100 years to stuff everything into it. And everything is vented. Everything is repackaged. But why don't you just go north where there's no conflict, there's no fresh water, there's no communities, and bury it up there? Dig a big hole in the ground and bury it. But see, if you put it deep in the ground, eventually it will melt down. If you abandon it, it's going to melt down because these are fuel bundles. They will melt down. If they're abandoned, they don't need oxygen, so they're going to consume all the rocks and steel and everything around it. And eventually water is going to get there, and water comes in and hits this stuff. It'll crack the earth open and it'll be vented forever into the environment. It's not even supposed to exist, and they know that. What are they up to? The industry is so much malfeasance going on. He said, I agree that there are risks and high costs involved in proposed deep burial, deep geological repositories of this toxic radioactive waste material. Well, the toxicity of it is that it's splitting atoms. And so they're hemorrhaging into the environment 24 hours a day. So the reactors that would power homes for 1 million people, that reactor core, and there's so many of them I can't count them, is still splitting the same atoms as it would to boil water for 1 million homes. So how much water you got to boil just to make a cup of water? It's an extraordinary number, folks. So once you take the fuel out and put it in a fuel pool, so to say, that fuel pool is boiling off all the water all day long. Typically 120,000 liters has to be replenished each day. And this is special water too, by the way. But that water is saturated with isotopes because the fuel rod has trillions of microscopic cracks, which allows even more atoms to egress from it. And that ends up in the water boils off, it evaporates, and that liberates the radioactive isotopes into the community. And so these are sleeper cell terrorist organizations is what a nuclear power plant is. These are disease factories. Excuse me. Even the process to extract recyclable material from the used fuel, which would only recycle a fraction of a percent. then the rest of it still has to be buried. And by putting it through the process to extract it, you contaminate the hemisphere by doing it, as we see with La Hague, with the Windscale, with Donneray, for instance, in Europe. And we have the studies to back up these assertions. Other suggestions that the waste should remain permanently on the surface, where it's still splitting atoms into the environment. So this technology was a disaster for all species. And you can trace the decline of the 8 million species directly back to the inception of nuclear. And the amount of waste we're talking about is stunning. For instance, Hanford in the United States in the 40s and 50s had dumped 450 billion gallons of nuclear sludge that's gone through a chain reaction, means it's splitting atoms, into the soil on line pits, right alongside the Columbian River, by the way, which feeds about 25,000 farms downstream. And that's equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Readers offer reasons why nuclear waste should be stored in southern Ontario. Since southern Ontario benefited from 60% of the electrical power, the rest went over to America. Coming from nuclear plants, they have a moral obligation to accept their own waste. Again, you're going to contaminate the entire biosphere. So no matter where you put it, you're going to contaminate the entire biosphere. And the moral obligation to accept their waste means they're morally obligated to get sick and die from the diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. Because it attacks everything with replicating cells with equal enthusiasm. Nothing has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So the proposal for the storage of nuclear waste near Bancroft, Ontario, should be considered essential and close to the radioactive waste at Chalk River, where they had 2 nuclear meltdowns. And it's right on the Ottawa River. Like, just because you got nuclear waste on the Ottawa River don't mean you should put more there. And the nuclear plants in southern Ontario, which are right alongside the Great Lakes, the uranium tailing at Blind River, again, river. Serpent River is another major disaster. The Elliott Lake is another one. All these flow eventually down to the St. Lawrence, into the Atlantic, as well as the contaminated soil from the Camco plants in Port Hope. That whole city should have been abandoned. They took the tailings from the uranium mines and used it for the foundations for the schools, for the subdivisions. The ultimate betrayal, eh? And they knew it was evil. And every time you look at the nuclear industry, this is what you're seeing. This unbelievable, hateful contempt for everybody and everything. The industry has no right to exist. Everybody in the industry should absolutely be arrested for the crimes they committed and will commit. So they got all these disease factories, and this is where they figured it's okay to put more there. And all of it's right by your drinking water supplies and some of the biggest aquifers in the northern hemisphere. Bill supporting development of nuclear energy wins the passage in Kentucky Senate. This is one of the stranger stories again. That's the cycle of nuclear now, isn't it? The Kentucky Senate voted overwhelmingly Monday to lay the foundation to attract nuclear energy projects. Well, just because, like, there's many states down there that have an open season for nuclear, but you don't see nuclear popping up everywhere. The Republican Senator Danny Carroll said Kentucky should embrace a cross-section of sources, including coal, gas, renewable, to meet its energy needs. Well, why would you do anything if geothermal exists is the question I can't resolve. But stressed that his legislation would prepare the bluegrass state for what he sees as an inevitable surge of nuclear energy, but because they're talking about small modular reactors that don't even exist. and most likely will never exist, because last year nuclear lost 1.7 gigawatts in 2023 of the global capacity, which is equal to 2 large nuclear power plants. But there was 507 gigawatts of renewables came online in 12 months. And the total nuclear worldwide for 80 years right now is 365 gigawatts. So it was almost double of the total nuclear came online in renewables in 12 months. So why would anybody consider nuclear? And why isn't the world just going ahead and doing geothermal? Why are we pretending that doesn't exist? What he sees as an inevitable surge of nuclear energy. It passed the House at a 34-0 vote. There was no opposition. He believes nuclear is the future. It is imperative that the Commonwealth stay in the forefront and not get left behind. But the technology doesn't even exist that they're alluding to. There is no small modular reactors. There won't be. NuScale clearly showed that this was just nothing but a Ponzi scheme, where they're taking current investors' money to pay off previous investors' money and then siphoning off whatever they could in between. They didn't even try to build a reactor. And that if they had built a reactor, that the estimate was it would have been well over $20 billion for about 460 megawatts, like not even half the size of a large nuclear power plant. And that they've been in business for 18 months, and that was their apex, was that they ripped off all these investors, and they shouldn't have been on the stock markets because they didn't have a product. So what he's talking about here is simply about the ability for them to siphon money that could easily been used to come up with solutions like geothermal. His measure passed 34-0 when there's not even a product and no hope in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years of it coming to fruition. With coalfield senators joining in support, the bill heads to the House next, and Republicans have a super majorities in both chambers. So you can pass it all you want, but if you don't have a product, then that makes you useless, doesn't it? That makes you the biggest idiot in history in your family, basically. By the same tally, the Senate adopted a related resolution directing the State Public Service Commission to prepare for nuclear energy, but that doesn't exist, because we're talking about the small modular reactors, which is 100% fable. It simply doesn't exist. It would also support development of a nuclear energy ecosystem meant to enhance the economy and protect the environment. Well, you can't protect the environment from nuclear. We know that. Now, after 80 years, that's undeniable. That's completely undeniable. And there is, like the nuclear energy ecosystem, there is no ecosystem for the small modular reactors because it's not developed. There's 100 designs out there, so there's no uniformity. There's no consensus. Right? It's all just hyperbole. It's total conjectures, opinions. Everybody's design is completely different. And none of them are into the regulatory agencies. So it's not coming to fruition anytime in the next 30 years because it has to go through this whole process. Because once you come up with a design, which is like 1 million pieces of paper, and you submit that finally to the regulatory agencies, they got to hire 300, 400, 500 people to go through all of these papers and coordinate the engineering, redesign or point out the flaws, give it back after 4 or 5 years to the developers, who now got to redesign the whole thing, re-engineer the whole thing, submit it again to the regulatory agency. So time to get to that process, you're 10, 12, 14 years down the road, if everything goes great. So now you finally get, okay, we're going to license that design. And like for NuScale, it's 18 years down the road, and they still haven't got a complete application into the regulatory agency. So now you got to build experimental reactors. You're going to have to run that for many years and find flaws. Then you have to redesign all of that, submit that to the regulatory agencies. And this could go back and forth for 25 or 30 years, and typically does. So once you get to that point, now you can start putting together a supply chain. It's going to take another 5 or 10 years. Now you got to train a workforce, which takes 4 or 5 years for each employee to be up to speed to be able to work in that environment. So you're looking at 30, 35, 40 years down the road before the actual comes to producing them for sale. And there's no economy of scale because they're so small. And then the waste what you're talking about doing is making mixed plutonium mixed oxide fuel, which is a high assay fuel, though 15% weapons grade fuel, to make these small modular reactors be able to produce energy to quantify and putting them in a community or whatever the case may be. They want to move all the regulatory hurdles and checks and balances so that there's no oversight. Again, this is absurdness. When geothermal can fit the bill, do the job, and be up and running that year. Why are we punching ourselves in the back of the head looking at nuclear when the solution has been around for thousands of years and is under everybody's feet no matter where you tune? Quaise Electric, for instance, and a number of other geothermal companies have cracked that code for drilling deep enough quickly to be able to produce the things I'm talking about in the time I'm talking about. The authority would set criteria for voluntarily designations of nuclear-ready communities. Such a designation would signal to the nuclear industry that the communities are open to nuclear. But there's many communities open to nuclear. We don't see any movement. But geothermal is left out of the picture, and everybody suffers because these people are beholden to the nuclear industry and nobody else. They're not there for the constituents. They're there for the lobbyists. They're the opposite of good. They're bad. Nuclear energy in the spotlight at the World Government Summit. Nuclear energy in the spotlight at the World Government Summit. And this creature, everywhere he shows up, we see evil all around, right? Every single time. The World Government Summit. Think about that statement, the World Government Summit. This is a group of very influential people that are trying to take over your countries. It's a group of people trying to take over your countries, and they got incredible influence, incredible money, incredible coordination. World Government Summit Organization is a global neutral, is not neutral at all, and it's not a non-profit organization. Dedicated to shaping the future of governments. Dedicated to meddling with countries and taking over their governments by bringing them together in an environment where it's considered sedition for governments to get together and meet secretively like this. Right? This is the reason you have charters in your countries so your government doesn't sell you out like this. And since its inception, post-Fukushima, 2 years after Fukushima, the summit has championed the missions of shaping the future government. Meddling, basically. The World Government Summit is a global knowledge exchange platform for governments that was established in 2013 under the dynamic leadership of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President, Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates, ruler of Dubai, and is poised to scale, some say the ruler of the world, and is poised to scale newer heights of excellence and inclusivity. 38,000 attendees, 25,000 virtual attendees, 200 plus traders / journalists, 25,000 plus media resources. So they have a whole lot of weight, don't they? And bilateral agreements without referendums to the countries that are going to be affected by this darkness. And United Nations, look how many United Nations organizations are represented here. Food and Agricultural Organizations, United Nations. international financial companies, Parliamentary Union, which is United Nations, International Labour Organizations, which is United Nations, IRENA, which is United Nations, UNICEF, which is United Nations, the United Nations Refugee Agency, the UNDP, United Nations itself. It's unbelievable. The Industrial Development Organization, United Nations Habitat, World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, World Health Organization, United Nations, World Food Program, United Nations. It's unbelievable. They've dominated. It's unbelievable what we're looking at here. So this is United Nations working against your future and the future of humanity. That's what we're seeing right here. Whatever you do, don't give a nickel to UNICEF, for goodness sakes. These are just despicable. And look at the partners. Google, Oracle, Microsoft, Zoom, Amazon, Huawei, Visa. Unbelievable. The influence we're talking about is unbelievable. And they've taken over your planet behind your back. And you can't have a future with this group around you. And look at this creature right there, for goodness sakes. It's unbelievable what this organization is up to. Very influential, very powerful. They have all the shakers and movers at their fingertips. They have endless resources, endless money, and their job is to steal your future, steal the future of humanity and the 8 million species. And this despicable, hateful Nazi, this is a Nazi. He's the Fourth Reich. This is Klaus Schwab. Previously, he was a professor. And so, when you start out evil, that's where you're going to end up eventually, isn't it? The World Economic Forum has taken over Canada as government, many other countries. It's a hateful, despicable, meddling scumbag. A revolting parasite on humanity is the best way to describe Klaus Schwab. And I can't remember what their income is from fees paid by taxpayers from different countries, I might add. Something like $1 billion a year income. And then backed up by United Arab Emirates. Of course, in United Arab Emirates, the average person has no rights whatsoever. They import slaves and take away their passports from impoverished countries. And they kill people, they can't even be arrested. It's surreal what we're looking at. And we see this complete takeover. It's unbelievable. Very powerful, very influential, very far-reaching, complete control of media, complete control of your governments, complete control of your institutions, your universities, a complete betrayal. They even got Elon Musk and many other... it's just hard for me to wrap my mind around, and they're promoting nuclear. That's what we're talking about tonight. Because they have so much influence and they're promoting nuclear, that's bad for humanity and the 8 million species. The world government. So they're basically telling you they're taking over your planet. World Government Summit. Queen Rena. To bring the world together, what are you talking about? To steal the world? And this is coordinated by UN, obviously. You've seen all the UN idiot machines tied up in it, right? They talk about humanity, but they spit on humanity. They spit on the species. And they're promoting nuclear, the very falling of humanity in 8 million species. The biggest threat to humanity in 8 million species is nuclear. And this disgusting parasite, she really is a despicable parasite. And that's how they get the job. These are the inbreeds of the inbreeds. These are the parasites. What right do they have to supersede your countries? They don't, right? They have United Nations, which is well established worldwide as a degenerate industry. You got all kinds. You got Ban Ki-moon. You look at all these people involved in. There's really something. The World Economic Forum is humanity's also biggest enemy, and the world government is their biggest enemy too. Tucker Carlson is also a key player. Think about that statement. They got Huffington Post creator, and anybody remember Huffington Post when it was first created, and Ariana Huffington originally? She's a despicable, just a despicable person. Despicable too. In every sense of that word. The Rwanda politician, American businessman known as the chief executive officer of Uber. And you see all these big organizations, Uber and Amazon and Elon Musk and everybody else. And then their executive chiefs and officers, they show up everywhere else. And it's always with the connotations of evil, isn't it? And this disgusting parasite, this unbelievable parasite, Klaus Schwab, is a parasite, eh? Even Neil deGrasse Tyson is selling his soul. Steve Wozniak, really, from Microsoft. And the Queen of Jordan, participating in a takeover of your planet. All of these people are. Even scumbag Branson, National Geographic fellow. National Geographic fellow. Think about that statement. If you work for National Geographic, you're now an important person worldwide. When you're absolutely not. You're just... It's unbelievable what we're looking at. The Best Ministers Awards. They always do that, don't they? And look at all the links. World Government Summit, Smart Cities, Digital Government. This is a takeover of your planet. You are being enslaved now forever. If you don't fight back, you will have no future. Your loved ones will have no future. Canada's nuclear ambition clashes with clean hydrogen goals. Canada is completely pro... the nuclear industry took over Canada in the 40s. Canada doesn't really exist. The World Climate Action Summit, which is Conference of Parties, also known as Constipated Parties. And Canada endorses the Declaration of Triple Nuclear Energy. So what? Nuclear went backwards last year by 1.7 gigawatts. Renewables was 507 gigawatts, which is equal to over 600 large nuclear power plants. I just wanted to document these scums and degenerates and monsters and call them what they are. Traitors and monsters. Meddlers that are parasites on humanity. Funding approval for large-scale geothermal survey in Munich, Germany. Environmental Defense calls on Alberta government to drop his opposition to clean renewable energy. Demonstrates a government bias against wind, solar, and geothermal energy productions in Alberta. Fervo Energy raises $244 million to accelerate a deployment of next generation geothermal. But all the, there's 100 small modular reactors companies worldwide. And that's not even coffee change for them. But geothermal can barely get anything. All the universities are working on fusion and nuclear. None of them are working on geothermal. Geothermal's right there. It's everywhere. It's right under everybody's feet worldwide. Everybody has access to it. And when they try to convince you that it's only certain places, that's complete fabrication. It's under everybody's feet, no matter where you are on the planet. Geothermal's everywhere. Oil and gas companies accelerating investments in geothermal energies, not governments, not Elon Musk, not Bill Gates, not the World Economic Forum, not the World Government Summits. No. They're going for nuclear. They're promoting nuclear. Geothermal heat pump market to witness a huge growth by 2031. And everybody can buy geothermal heat pumps. Startup plans projects to drill for a million-year energy source. This is Quaise Electric. Quaise Energy, rather. So Quaise Energy, they can drill down typically with your drill several miles pretty quick. But once you get deeper, it's a little harder. And so what they're going to do is vaporize the rocks. They're going to drill down 10 miles and tap into 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, which is more than hot enough to replace gas, oil, coal, or nuclear plants and leave the rest of the infrastructure there, right? And the technology that they're going to use is 4 to 8 times quicker than the current technology. And their first one is this year, and they'll expect to be up to full production by 2028. But that's only because the World Economic Forum, the World Government Summits, all the universities, all the medias refuse to back a solution. Instead, they go for a shot in the dark with something that doesn't exist, like small modular reactors. And Canada has signed many, many memorandum of understandings with organizations that don't have a product, rather than come up with solutions that exist and can be implemented the same year. By drilling deeper, hotter, and faster than any project attempted to date using a device called a gyrotron, and after using standard drills to cut through initial ground layers, Quaise experts will bring out the proprietary hole makers, which utilize millimeter waves to reach unprecedented depths. On the other end, a dozen miles down, temperatures will hit almost 1,000 degree Fahrenheit. At these temperatures, geothermal is so powerful it can repower most fossil fuel power plants around the world, and it enables a much faster energy transitions. And Google is even utilizing currently geothermal, the equivalent of 2,800 homes of energy, to power their data centers, which have corrupted your future. Google is so evil, it doesn't even know what the human experience is anymore. It can re-employ oil and gas crews in an effort that produces energy with little to no waste, and happens with using less than 1% of the land needed for solar and wind projects. And if you had hundreds of universities work on any of the issues, you would solve them all by the end of the week. It's actually that easy. But the universities refuse to work on it because they're too busy working on nuclear that will never come to fruition. Here in Canada, they're going to do a mid-rise of geothermal energy proposed in Scarborough, Ontario. Now that's a drawing, right? But look, they actually put birds up there. Unbelievable. They got birds up in the sky in a drawing. You know there's not going to be any birds in the near future. There's barely any now. Nuclear has wiped it out. Go back and watch the first part of my video last night if you're not familiar with the research expeditions we've done for 6 years on the ocean for 4 to 5 months a year without coming ashore. And you'll see this is an extinction event. Fukushima is an extinction event. I found this page today. The Fukushima nuclear accident update log from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Fukushima nuclear accident update. The 15th of March 2011, Japanese authorities have informed the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is just a company, a subsidy of UN. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. They have an enormous amount of influence, though. And the third biggest contributor to the International Atomic Energy Agency is Japan, by the way, the third biggest donor. Japanese authorities informed the International Atomic Energy Agency that the evacuation of the population from the 20-kilometer zone around Fukushima has been successfully completed. That's simply not true. 4 days after the tsunami, you didn't evacuate that. But here's the International Atomic Energy Agency, more than happy to cut your throat and everybody else's. The Japanese authorities have also advised the people within a 30-kilometer radius to take cover indoors, which is a mistake. You need to run away. You cannot stay in a nuclear fallout zone. Iodine tablets were distributed to evacuation centers, but no decision yet has been taken under administration. And as we know, because we've covered it since 2011, that the iodine pills weren't passed out on the 15th of March, and it wasn't used in April or May or June either. No decision has yet been taken under administration. The International Atomic Energy Agency continues a liaison with the Japanese authorities monitoring the situation as it evolves. But why? Who cares about the International Atomic Energy Agency? Why would you care about them? They're not regulatory agencies. They don't have any authorities. They can't compel somebody to do something. They're a subsidy of a military-industrial complex, which is a company known just the same as McDonald's or Walmart. It's called UN. Why are you giving up your sovereignty, your freedoms, to a corporation? The Japanese government, so that's why I'm so, that's why I'm so popular, right? Because I'm having a real conversation. So that's why you see 34 people on my show, because that's pretty impressive, right? 33 people. Asking for International Atomic Energy Agency teams of experts to be sent to Japan, why didn't they volunteer? In fact, the International Atomic Energy Agency has only been to Japan nuclear plant 5 times. All of them were in 2023. Preparation for the missions are currently underway. Why are they asking because that was the cover. Who's going to make the cover story work? Is the IAEA, which is just a lobbying group for the nuclear industry, obviously. Unit 4 was shut down for a routine planned maintenance outage, and after the outage, all the fuel from the reactor was transferred to the spent fuel pool. But when you do an outage, you don't transfer all the fuel. When does that happen? I've never seen that happen. Plant operators considered removal of the panels from Unit 5 and 6 reactor buildings to prevent the possible buildup of hydrogen in the future. That's quite interesting. There was a buildup of hydrogen in Unit 1, 2, and 3 that led to the explosions. The hydrogen is created by the meltdown. International Atomic Energy Agency continues to monitor and seek information on the status of the plant workers, reactor conditions, and spent nuclear fuel at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. And the International Atomic Energy Agency remains concerned over the status of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where seawater injections to cool the reactors in Unit 1, 2, and 3 are continuing. Well, this is on the 15th. You're not injecting seawater. You're not injecting seawater because the building's detonated and threw fuel rods and pellets and assemblies all over the site. These are lethal doses everywhere. There's no power. You had 1,200 miles of the coastline ripped out. The International Atomic Energy Agency spends all of his time lying, all of his time being deceptive and deceitful and dishonest. After explosions at boat Unit 1 and 3, the primary containment vessels of both units are reported to be intact, but they're not. Not even close to being intact. They're completely gone. The fuel pools and the reactor cores are gone. And the explosion that occurred at the 14th of March at the number 2 may have affected the integrity of the primary containment vessel. All 3 explosions were due to accumulation of hydrogen. Well, they use uranium in fracking to enhance the explosives by 8 or 10 times. And so you aerosol not just hydrogen, you aerosol the uranium and plutonium. And so when you got a spark or you introduced oxygen, you detonated all of them. And that's why this cooked off the way that it did. These are incredible, huge buildings. A fire at Unit 4 on the 14th lasted 2 hours because it burns at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Does that look like a fire that lasted 2 hours to anybody? And look at Unit 3, there's nothing actually left of it. So Unit 1, 2, 3, and 4 are completely gone, and so are 4 decades of reactor cores in the fuel pools. A 30-kilometer no-fly zone. I'm going to play a video from the International Atomic Energy Agency from, I thought it was from the 15th. It looks like it was posted on the 15th on their website. Watch the video. The 15th of March 2011. And that was the former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which was this guy over here, right? We used to roast him all the time over there, but now they got Raphael Grossi, so now we roast him, right? He's going around sniffing bicycle seats. Let's play this video. This is very interesting stuff. It'll start any minute.
Since I provided a briefing yesterday, there have been some events happened in Japan, and these were varying events. They include the spent fuel pond fire, and probably that was the cause of the release of radiation, high level of radioactivity.
So he just said spent fuel pools on fire. Let's go backwards and hear that one more time.
Spent fuel pond fire.
Spent fuel on fire. That's an incredible statement. They deny that today, right? Now they deny anything melted down, there was any damage.
And probably that was the cause of the release of radiation, high level of radioactivity.
High levels of radioactivity
was observed in the vicinity of the reactors, and there is a possible core damage.
Not possible, guaranteed.
Of the fuel, and there is also possibility of suppression chamber damage.
So suppression chamber damage. So when we go back and look at these buildings, that's the explosions, right? Look at that explosion there. There's not just damage, it's completely gone. Everything is gone. And the same thing with reactor 3, it's completely gone. It's completely gone. So when he said the fuel pool caught fire, that will, you're talking about 40 years of reactor cores are in the pools. And so when the pool catches fire, this conium cladding is going to burn at around 1800 degrees. That's going to boil off the water in the pool pretty quick. But once it boils down a little bit more and the fuel rods are actually on fire, now you're talking at 4, 5, 6,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It's going to cook off the pool in 0 time, right? And then as you start melting a bunch of the fuel, you're going to hit around 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And you don't need oxygen for these things to burn on top of that. So they are going to burn. And they did. So very deceitful and very dishonest. And they had these pictures right away. They seen that picture right away and that picture right away.
These were the varying events that happened since last briefing up to now. Spent fuel fire, release of radiation, perhaps from the spent fuel pond, and high level of radiation was observed, possible core damage, and possible suppression chamber damages. These are varying events.
Spent fuel fire at reactor 4. Let me just chop that off so I can guarantee that it'll get easier to pick up wherever.
And the main problems, one is a fire at Unit 4 of Fukushima Daiichi spent fuel pond.
Okay, I'm just going to play a clip in between that. Just bear with me 1 second. Here we go. So this is the journalist. I'm going to get it out of the way. You got ABC Cecilia Veg in your bottom right-hand corner, the biggest in Australia. Currently a White House press club from CBS. You have CBS Seth Dorn, the senator's son, top left-hand corner. You have BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes, who are all going to pretend they're in the fuel pool at Reactor 4 that he's talking about.
Where I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So you got these people pretending they're in a building that doesn't even exist. Right? The building doesn't even exist. Let's go back to the Director General of the United Nations of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
We were informed that Unit 4 spent fuel pond was on fire, and later
was on fire. A spent fuel pool. As if they're talking about a barbecue or something. This is like the most catastrophic thing imaginable in human history. And currently the International Atomic Energy Agency is claiming that nothing got out and what did was equal to 3 grams of sugar.
It was extinguished at 200 UT.
Look at all the degenerate scum in the audience there. I screwed that up, did I? Hang on.
200 UTC today, 15th of May.
So he said the 15th of May, right? He does it again.
We have not been informed of the exact cause of the fire. And this fire at the fuel pond, spent fuel pond, is likely the cause of the raised radiation levels observed.
And which they claim was at several microsieverts at the gate. The corruption is it's unbelievable how corrupt these people actually are. So the video is posted on YouTube at the International Atomic Energy Agency on the 15th of March. And so he must have said May by accident. Fukushima Nuclear Accident Information Sheet, 16th of March, the next day. A team of experts from around the world conducted an international fact-finding mission in Japan. They visited the Tokyo Electric Power Company's Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station. There's zero possibility the International Atomic Energy Agency went to the nuclear meltdown site. Why that was just happening and that was just happening. It's zero possibility. And the problem is we've been covering these for so many years. that they're perpetual liars. They literally don't refuse to. That was one of the rare moments I've ever heard the International Atomic Energy Agency acknowledge the fuel pool had caught fire, right? And he said it over and over and over. And when you look at the pictures, then, because he doesn't talk about reactor 3, he's talking about reactor 4. But at that same time, reactor 3 looked like that. That was the original pictures, right? And marine expert. Now, like, again, right, they're so vague. And then they use these particular people to claim that everything is hunky-dory and safe, right? Any additional radiation levels will contribute only to a small amount to natural background radiation exposures. Well, natural background has nothing to do with anthropogenic man-made radiation. It has zero to do with it. Please refer to the World Health Organization's fact sheets on seafood safety. I went over there, the page is missing. For information on radiation health, visit the World Health Organization website. I went over there, that page is missing. You may also wish to visit the International Atomic Energy website explaining radiation everyday life, and that page is missing. And when I show you this, because you can see all the hyperlinks in blue, as well as information regarding the radiation dose in Tokyo Bay. I went to that link, and I got this, which I believe is the current one. This is 2021 or something, instead of 2011. 0.05 microsieverts, or millisieverts. So these numbers are measurements of radiation dose for the year in the port around Tokyo Bay is 2024. And you got 0.000029 millisieverts. It's absurdly, because Tokyo, let me explain this to you. First off, you don't measure in microsieverts or millisieverts that far away. You measure in physical atoms, which is typically described as becquerels, which is a pulse of energy every second. So let me just look up, just hang on. I'll find you some Tokyo numbers. In a moment. When my computer decides to catch up. There we go. We got a couple here. Let me just grab one. So, for instance, in Tokyo, was 919,000 becquerels a square meter. So to suggest that it's 0.000029 today, it doesn't work that way. This stuff doesn't go away. And then these statements, in general, people living further away at lower risk than those who live nearby. You don't need anybody to point that out to you. Right? It's strictly for deception and dishonesty. Additional information can be found on the World Health Organization site. I went there and there's nothing there. Are there health risks to people living outside of Japan? And so they say thus far there's nothing in other countries. But that's around the 15th or something. So the plume didn't show up on the 15th. It showed up around the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th, right? And it was 450,000 times above detection levels just for the Xenon 133, which is that study right there. Please visit the website of the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare to find up-to-date information. And this blows my mind. This is what you're going to see next. Radioactive material detected in food and drinking water. So, again, they're talking in microsieverts and millisieverts. This one is microsieverts. category, drinking water, 10 millisieverts a year. Milk, 50 millisieverts a year. General foods, becquerels a kilogram. Infant food at 50, but 11 becquerels a kilogram for children. They start to see heart damage. At 50 is permanent heart damage. At 50 for adults per kilogram, it's permanent lesions to the vital organs. But wait till you get a load of some of this stuff. So concept of the limit for general foods. So look at age category under 1, average is 460 atoms per kilogram. But when you get down to men and women, it's 160. So children's are allowed to have 3 times more radiation than an adult. It's surreal, right? That's unbelievable. World Health Organization, which shouldn't exist and is not an arbiter of facts, guidance level for radioactive cesium in drinking water is 10 atoms per kilogram. Well, you bioaccumulate that all year long, and you got a significant catastrophic dose in your bones and your bodies and your livers and your lungs. Children consume a lot. The limits are not established for radioactive iodine because it has a short half-life, he says, but the damage lasts for the rest of your life. Uranium level is almost the same in the power plant site as in the natural environment, which is insane to suggest this. This is the Japanese government. I'll show you who the organizations in Japan that came up with this. But to suggest that uranium is the same in the nuclear power plant site as the natural environment, again, this is why you should hate nuclear. It's unbelievable. Not to exceed a millisievert a year, but why would you talk about... Because strontium-90, if I get strontium-90 in my food, you're not measuring it in millisieverts or millisieverts. You're measuring it in physical atoms, because that's what's there. It's a physical atom. It's completely dishonest to use those connotations, right? 50 becquerels a kilogram, which is half of the limit for general food, 100 becquerels a kilogram, applies to milk and infant food. These are sick people, folks. These are unbelievable, twisted, and demented people. But it gets worse, unfortunately. Let me see. Here we go. I think we're in the right section. In the case of a Japanese person that weighs 60 kilograms, potassium 40 is 4,000 becquerels per person, carbon 14 at 2,500. But this is natural stardust. This is not anthropogenic man-made stuff. What's the difference between external exposure and internal exposure? External exposure refers to the exposure to radiation emitted by the radioactive material outside the body. And internal exposure is radiation inside our baby, which we intake primarily through breathing. External exposures, internal exposures have the same degree of effect on the human body. No, they don't. Like, my goodness. That's terrifying that they've done that. When it's in your body, when it's outside your body, you're being hit with pulse energy. But when it's in your body attacks every single atom with white blood cells for the rest of your life. And because it's in your body, it's pulsing energy every second, almost at the speed of light. And it's damaging just endless cells and chromosomes and DNA and everything else. Your body tries to repair that every second. Of course, it can't. And it also has to attack the source. And so as you bioaccumulate this stuff in your body, the difference is unbelievable. So here they are with their official narrative claiming that external exposures, internal exposures have the same degree of effect on the human body. They say tritium, where does tritium occur? In the form of tritium contaminated water combined with oxygen, was universally present pre-nuclear from 0.1 to 1 becquerel a liter in rivers and oceans. And since tritium is contained in a small amount of water, now like Canada has limits around 44,000 atoms per liter because of the can-do reactors or disease factories. You can't contain it. The radiation emitted by tritium is weak, and the effect of the human body per becquerel of radioactive material due to the internal exposures is about 1 150 to 1 350 that of potassium-40. So they're saying potassium-40 is a bigger dose by 350 times than tritium, which is simply not true. Because if you're talking about natural tritium, that's one thing, but we're talking about tritium-3H, which is anthropogenic man-made tritium. That's outrageous. What an absurd betrayal. What a terrifying betrayal. What a revolting thing to do to humanity. The nuclear industry spends its entire time trying to exterminate everybody. We are constantly exposed to small amounts of radiation, but we have always lived our lives as usual without becoming particularly concerned about the effects on our health. And that the effects on the radiation depends not on its present, but the amount of exposures. No, not the amount. A single atom in your body can trigger a cancer in 30 or 40 years. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life and builds a sarcophagus around it. Oh, and look at this one. Will the radioactive material intake in baby remain long? And so here they are suggesting that cesium-137 in children, for instance, will only last 9 days. Like, this is insanity because it sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. It never goes away. It's organically bound, like tritium will be. Will the effects of radiation be inherited? The hereditary effects of radiation exposure in humans have not been reported in past case studies and surveys. Like, now these pictures are going to be pretty hard for you to look at, but you should look at them because it's important. This is some of the children of Chernobyl. So to suggest that this is not passed on to children, and these are the victims of Chernobyl, I think it's stunning how evil this nuclear industry actually is, to suggest that there's no adverse side effects. Did you know that in Japan, let me find a study for you actually. It's frightening that they hate us that much. It's frightening that they're so evil. And it's just this group of them are destroying the future of all the species in humanity. It's just this stupid inbreed group that has never been held accountable and has no incentive not to be evil. They've gotten away with it so long now, they're genocidal. Let me go backwards for a second. Give me 1 minute because I have so much here. It's been a while since we pulled up that study. I know it's in this page here. It's in a folder. I got so much of it. And it's worth waiting for. We'll find it in a second. Hopefully. I'm having a hard time focusing tonight. See, one of the big problems is Congress, Parliament, senators and diets, and they lack the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. Only the nuclear regulatory agencies, which is appointed for each administration, have the authorities to make it illegal to poison you. Yeah, I don't see it off the top of my head. I can try one more time. Yeah, I'm not showing up. I don't know what I got done with it. I know it should be right there. Okay, it's okay. Oh. Well, it's important, so just bear with me. I know one more spot I can look. Because we're almost finished anyway. I'll find it over here in my pile. Dana's pile. These piles have so much there. It's just... That's not it. That's radioactive fouler covering the planet. I'll recognize it by sight in a second. It's not too far down my list. This was a study anyway in Japan where 14.2% of every 100,000 children need open heart surgery. I wanted to bring up the study. Here it is. I wanted to bring up the study. Congenital heart disease operations rose. It's actually 14.2% per 100,000 live births for a complex congenital malformation. Heart diseases. In other words, newborns need open heart surgery at the rate of 14,200 per 100,000 live births in Japan. So to suggest that it's not hereditary, it's not passed on, right, is will the effects of radiation be inherited? Absolutely, positively, unequivocally. And if you don't believe it, go tell that to the victims in Chernobyl, right? And then look at the numbers for the T's and everything else. I mean, you know, the food was banned in 14 prefectures by 55 countries for a decade. And they replaced all those people. And I'm not going to take you through all of this, but again, look what the average, when it goes to babies under 1 year of age, the number is almost triple what it is for an adult. So what the hell are they up to? So when you hear them talking about microsieverts and millisieverts, and this is the government agencies, let me go backwards for 1 second. So this is the people that are putting out that documentation in Japan. These are crazies, right? So radiation doses of 0.6 millisieverts per hour on the 15th of March, when you had reactors detonating all over the place, is unbelievable. I got 2 clips here I'm going to play you from Harvard University talking about doses. There's short video clips, and he explains why millisieverts and microsieverts are not helpful. We were looking for this last night.
And in the US context, we think of REM, and I assume in the Japanese context, people would think of Seabed. The fatal dose from whole body exposure, median dose is around 350, 400 REM, or 3.5 to 4 Seabed.
Delivered pretty quickly.
Delivered over a period of hours, but in that case, death would follow over subsequent weeks.
So a short dose of 3 or 4 sieverts, you're going to die within a few weeks.
But that gives you an indication of the sort of hazard that you're concerned. So a few sieverts, if the dose looks as though it'll be more than 2 or 3 sieverts over a period of plume passage, for example, then you know that you're in a potentially lethal situation. Whereas speaking in microsieverts is not helpful.
So speaking in microsieverts is not helpful. Well, because the plume is physical atoms, right? It's not energy. It is energy, don't get me wrong, but it's not like you're in the house and there's radiation fallout outdoors and it's pulsing through your house. You're completely enveloped in radiation fallout. Okay, so that's what we got for everybody tonight. We made it. Got a bit of a showing last night. We got a full showing tonight, I think, did we? Let me check here. 11:58. So yeah, that's right. That's good timing. That's basically 2 hours. We're going to go over to the poll and close the poll, I guess. Is the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab a Nazi, like Hitler, but hates humans and all the Earth species? If you don't know who Klaus Schwab is, he's probably he's worse than Hitler ever was, I can tell you that much. By many orders of magnitude on top of that. So we got 38 votes in on the poll, but we got 38 votes on the poll, but we got more likes, which never happens unless it's a really controversial subject. And so normally you get more votes by, say, you usually get 10 more votes than you do likes on a video. Klaus Schwab is severely protected by all the media, Google, Amazon, everybody else, right? They protect Klaus Schwab. Because they're Hitler's little slaves, right? Thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Have a great day tomorrow. Unless there's some major event, I'll be back on Sunday at the regular time. And if you want to support this work, you can donate in the descriptions, in the very bottom of the descriptions, or you can buy t-shirts. You'll see links down there for that. And the 2 links for donations are directly to me. One is my website. So just scroll down a little tiny bit and you'll see a donate button, and just down past the first picture or something. And we've never had an issue. That site's been there for 10 years now. Or my PayPal. And remember, this operation doesn't exist without support. I'm not Klaus Schwab, and I don't get $1 billion a year. I'd be a maniacal, sadistic monster. Anyway, we'll see everybody on Sunday unless there's some breaking news shows up. Have a great night. Have a great day tomorrow. Thank you for finding time, the energy, and the courage to hear another narrative besides the official scumbag narrative. We'll see everybody on the other side. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.